Hi everybody, it's that time, it's the last project of the year. We're going to build a Flappy Bird clone in JavaScript and you're going to be able to play it on your phone in the browser. I'm going to do a series of screencasts here that walk through building individual components of the game, and then it'll be your job to assemble those components into a working game, to style it your own, add your own details, your own gameplay mechanisms to make it your own game. Though they all probably will end up fairly similar because Flappy Bird is a very simple game. This screencast, I'm going to walk through kind of the basic setup and how we're going to structure the game a little bit, and then the next one you'll learn a little bit about how to write JavaScript in this environment and how it differs from what you've been doing with Khan Academy. So here's a Flappy Bird game. I think this is also written in JavaScript. That's available at flappybird.io that I used for reference. There's only a few components. There's the bird, obviously, and when the game's not in motion, he's just kind of hovering up and down. And there's the ground moving right to left to simulate motion. Background's simple. It's not even doing parallax like we've done in other projects. And then when you click, the game starts. You know this part. And I'm not really going to try to play this game because I'm terrible at it. But when you click, he jumps, he falls down with gravity, and then you try to negotiate the gaps between all these pipes, and you get points as you get through them. And then if you crash into the pipe or the ground, game's over, and you get a score, and you can restart. That's pretty much it. Very, very simple game. The version that I wrote, try to keep it really simple and quick. And mine's very bare bones so that you have lots of room to add and customize it yourself. Looks a little bit like this. It's takes up the whole screen. I have this black ground along the bottom. My bird is just a circle. I have a score in the corner. And when you click, gravity starts applying, and you can jump through. And then instead of pipes, I just have bars. And right now the bars are really spread far apart, but I wanted to show how I think you should set up your browser during development and testing. So here's the first thing I want you to learn to do. When you are in Chrome, you can right-click anywhere and choose Inspect Element. That opens up the inspector. I have mine set up on the right side, which you can do using this control. It can be on the bottom or in a separate window, but I like the right side. And when you inspect that element, it shows you that you have a canvas element, a canvas HTML element. We'll talk about where this comes from in a moment. But that's where all the pixels are drawn. So when you draw an ellipse, it draws on this canvas. And we don't really need to do much with HTML because you're going to be almost using JavaScript and the drawing APIs like in Khan Academy, and there was no HTML at that point. So we can kind of ignore the Elements tab. I would recommend actually staying in the Console tab because this gives you a JavaScript console that you can use for debugging and other things. And then the last thing, because the intention for this game is that you'll be able to use it on your phone, is there's this device mode button here right by the elements, and that simulates a phone. Simulates the phone in terms of the size. You can even choose certain different sizes if you want to customize something specifically, but the default of 360 by 640, that's 360 pixels across and 640 pixels down. Works fine for these purposes. And then if you refresh, it'll render everything back correctly. And now this is a little bit more like what a phone game would look like. And you can play it like this, and it has a little bit more of the rhythm that the original game has because the obstacles come at a certain pace. So this is how I would set up Chrome while you're debugging. And what you're going to do is you're going to have your Chrome window next to your Cloud9 IDE. So hopefully you're getting to know Cloud9 pretty well. I'm really enjoying using it. I really wish we had this earlier in the year. But what we're going to do is I have a Cloud9 project that I've created myself. Mine's called Flappy, but you can call it whatever you want. And we'll show you in class how to clone this. So this is kind of the starting like a starter project. I've got a couple things set up already, so you don't have to do it. And you're going to be able to make a copy of this whole project, make it your own. You'll have your own URL that says your username / Flappy or whatever you call it. But you'll have all the same files. And what I did was I started with a README, which is pretty standard in most programming projects to have a README that kind of explains what's going on. Sometimes it explains the structure of the code or a getting started. The README I did here is just a little introduction to building Flappy Bird. So there's a little bit of stuff you can read here, and it has 2 links. It has a link to the game that I showed you that someone else made, and it has a link to the documentation for P5, which is what we'll be using to draw. So it has a breakdown of all the exercises. So the first one we're doing right now, which is the setup, like how Flappy Bird works, what all these files are, how to view everything in the browser. I'm going to show some simple P5 stuff just to show the differences between Khan Academy and what we'll be doing here, and remind you how the draw function in Khan Academy worked. The second exercise, we'll talk about how to do a game loop. This is something that I don't think we did a very good job of explaining for Wheel of Fortune. So I'm going to try to dig a little deeper into how games are structured in programming. And so that'll be really, really important. The exercise 3 will talk about the bird, how to make the bird, how to make it fall with gravity, how to make it jump, and some other details. 4 will be the obstacle, the pipes, how to draw that, how to move it. It's pretty simple. And 5 is probably the most complex one. That's going to be how to determine if the bird hits something else, how to do hit testing. And it'll involve a little bit more math, but Flappy Bird is fortunately simple enough that it shouldn't be too intense. So as we're looking through this, you can always return to this for some reminders, but that's pretty much covers it. Wanted to talk a little bit about the files that I have set up already. So we have an index.html file. We always start with an index for websites because that's the file that's loaded by default. And I have 2 other folders here. I have a CSS folder and a JavaScript folder that will serve as kind of the core of everything. The HTML file is really bare bones. I linked to a style sheet. It has almost nothing in it. You don't even have to worry about it, but I made it a separate file so that I could change things across the whole project, like we talked about previously. And then the by tag only links to other JavaScript right now because the canvas is actually created for you. The script tags point to, well, there's 2 script tags that point to external files, and there's 1 small script that I just embedded that I can explain to you if you care, but it's just a useful thing to have. And the 2 external files are P5.js, which is the library that allows you to draw and animate, and another file, it's arbitrarily called Flappy.js. That's what I called it. You can call it whatever you want as long as you rename everything consistently. But you can see these files in here. P5 is a large file. It will take a long time to load. If you want to look through it, you're welcome to. It's pretty hard to read, but it could be interesting. You could probably learn something looking through it. It does take forever to load because it is so large. So I was looking through it trying to find some color names. So that was kind of a useful thing to find. And then the Flappy.js file has very little in it to start, just some structure. And we'll talk more about all of these variables and objects and how they'll work later. So let's ignore that for now. One little hint or tip that I wanted to point out, this is pretty technical. It's not something that matters too much to you, but if you probably noticed when you browse a site like the New York Times on your phone, it actually looks like the full desktop site scaled down. And that's how phones work by default, is they pretend to be computers. They just scale everything down and then you zoom in and out to see everything. But you can actually tell the browser to treat your website differently if you choose to. And that's what this meta tag does here. It sets the viewport, which is what's visible. And it says, we're going to say that this web page is actually the width of the device, not 960, which I believe is the default. And it's roughly about the width of my screen. But actually like a thinner width that matches your device. And it also turns off zooming, because zooming doesn't make sense inside of a game. So that's a really useful thing. If you don't have that, then everything's going to look kind of weird. Inside of the project, there are 5 folders called EX1 through 5, example or exercise 1. And they actually mirror the other, what I just explained too. The index.html file is almost exactly the same across all of the exercises. It links to P5. It links to the common style sheet. And it links to a JavaScript file, but it's a different one for each one, because each exercise we're going to write different JavaScript. So in EX1, the index.html points to ex1.js. And we will write some JavaScript very briefly inside that file. To view everything, I would recommend loading up the root index.html file, the one that's directly in the Flappy folder, not inside one of the EX folders, and hitting run. I already have it running, so it's been running for a while now actually. So here's the log of what happened of the web server software that runs pointed at index.html. And what you can do, the very first thing in the log, which I will not be able to see right here, is the URL to your website, which mine is the name of my project dash my username.c9.io. And if you go to the root, it'll load the root index.html file, which is apparently working, but that's kind of weird. I think it must be cached because there's no, I removed all the code. There we go, I refreshed it. There's no code in there right now, it's just that kind of structure that I showed you, and you're going to fill it in so that your game will actually show at this point. While we're doing the exercises, you can type in the name of the folder for the exercise, like EX1, and it will load that index.html file instead of the root. So let's just demonstrate that this actually works. I'm going to put an h1 tag in here and say EX1. And if you reload, it's taking a moment for some reason, you see the EX1 side. So that's, you can just change things, and then I just switch back and forth between tabs to preview it. There's keyboard shortcuts for switching between tabs. They're different on the Windows machine, so I can't tell you what they are, but that's what I've been doing while I've been developing this. So what we're going to do in exercise 1 is just look at the P5 or processing.js website and pull in some code and just make sure everything works. And this is going to be very repetitive from what you had in Khan Academy. I would definitely recommend having the P5 website, the P5 reference open the whole time. It's really, really useful. And it's pretty well organized. They have like all the functions and properties that are available to you organized by topic here. So you have, if you wanted to see all the color functions, like, RGB. I don't see RGB actually. Where is RGB? This is what I do a lot. I just actually search. I don't see RGB. There's no RGB. I guess I've kind of forgotten how this works, but you can still use fill. So fill you understand pretty well, where you can pass it numbers and it turns them into, it sets the fill for the color. So you can look through there, and has lots of little examples. The ones that you probably recognize very well are the functions like ellipse and rectangle, arc, all these things. So these are what we'll use to draw, and that's really useful. To get everything wired up, we're going to start with the Getting Started page that P5 provides us. There's a lot of stuff here on how to set things up. I've done this already for you, and then you can set up your first sketch. So let's look at the JavaScript for exercise 1. So we don't really need to touch the index file for exercise 1. You can ignore it. We just really care about the JavaScript file. So the P5 documentation says, here's what you should type in your sketch. And it looks a little different in mine because I wanted to match what Khan Academy did. This is actually this is the most common way of defining a function in JavaScript, where you type function and then the name. But Khan Academy decided to teach you that you're going to define a variable that points to an anonymous function. So you say var, the function name, and then equals function. So I decided to set it up the way you've been used to the whole time. In Khan Academy, you didn't have to deal with the setup function. It was actually taken care of for you already. But we have to do it ourselves here because we don't have all the Khan Academy stuff. And all you really need to do in setup, there's lots of things you can do, but all you're going to do right now is call create canvas. Create canvas does exactly what it says, which is it creates the canvas element in the HTML page, puts it in the page, and then that's what all of the drawing functions will operate on. And if you wanted to see this in action, well, you've already seen this. The page loads and it creates a canvas. One thing you'll notice is that the width of the canvas, for some reason it's set twice, but we can ignore it. Let's just say it's 360 by 640. Those numbers, where do those numbers come from? They happen to match the device, which is great. That's exactly what we want. We want to fill the whole screen. But where do those numbers come from? Well, the two arguments that you pass into create canvas are the width and the height. And what I've chosen to do, this is in all of the scaffolded code that you have available to you in this project, is just set it to the actual width of the window. On a mobile device, it's the width of the screen, basically. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to determine if it's 360 or 480 or whatever the size of your phone is. You can just ask the browser, how big is your window? I'm going to make the canvas that big. So this line of code will be on in all of your scripts, and you can ignore that. At least on my Cloud9, there's a lot of warnings here. This triangle says create canvas is not defined. Don't worry about that. That's actually, there's probably a way to fix this, but I haven't figured it out yet. But create canvas is defined in a different JavaScript file. And Cloud9's not smart enough to know to look in the two different files for things. So you're using the create canvas function provided in P5.js. And Cloud9 is just like, I don't know where that comes from. It also has a little info saying, you're not using setup, don't worry about it. P5 will use setup. So, the getting started says, in your editor type the following, and it has an ellipse in the draw function. So let's go ahead and add that as well. I'm just going to copy paste it from there. And if I refresh my page, it drew an ellipse. Amazing. You recognize this very well. It drew it at 50. The X position is 50, the Y position is 50, the size is 80 wide and 80 tall. So pretty simple. This should be really familiar. And yep, that's what we see. And they have another example here. Let's do something a little more exciting. And not terribly exciting, but it's kind of cool. So let's just replace the code, the ellipse code here, with what they added. Doesn't format well at all when you paste, unfortunately. So I'm going to fix that. Hit save. It's got a lot more warnings. Again, mouse is pressed is provided by P5, fill is provided by P5. So don't worry about it. When you refresh the page, now it is following the mouse. So if you didn't know that's what it was going to do, now you know. The code's pretty easy to follow. You remember that draw runs repeatedly. It runs roughly 60 frames a second, or at least as fast as it can, up to that rate usually. And what draw is doing is always drawing a circle where your mouse is. And they have a little bit of extra code saying if the mouse is down, set the fill color to black. If it's up, set the fill color to white. So that's why most of the circles have a white fill with a black stroke. And then when you click the mouse, then you get a black fill and a black stroke. You can fill in the whole page here. So that should be really familiar. This shouldn't be surprising at all, but that's how P5 works when we set it up for an arbitrary web page, unlike in Khan Academy. So that's, I believe, all I've had to talk about here in exercise 1. So hopefully this makes sense. Obviously, we're going to go over some of this in class, show you how to clone the project so you can get started. But you can go through this tutorial once you're cloned, make sure everything works, and then we'll move on to exercise 2 in the next video.